Hey guys, welcome back to our series on gnarly stories of Scripture. Last week we talked about the origin of sin and the fall of man, and this week we're going to be talking about Abraham and Isaac. Now I want you to picture with me, if you would, your dream complete. What kind of wheels? What kind of trucks? What kind of deck? And I want you to dream that you get this complete, and you're skating around in the skate park and you do some sort of trick, and all of a sudden the tail snaps. And all of a sudden, all this effort you've been putting into this complete, the tricks you hope to land, the design choice you made, it's all washed out, it's all done. And you go and you get another deck and you're rolling around, but it's just not the same. That's kind of like what happens in this story, except what happens in this story is on a much larger scale. So, there are three main characters in this story. There's Abraham, who's God's chosen leader for his people, Isaac, Abraham's son, and God. And so our story picks up. Abraham is going about his business, and he hears the call of God to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him on an altar. Now, a bit of context on Isaac. Isaac was this miracle child promised to Abraham at 100 years old, and his wife at 90 years old, that God would cause Sarah to have a son. And after God said this, Abraham bowed his head in laughter and was like, there's no way at this advanced age that we're going to have a kid. And so God told them to name him Isaac, which in Hebrew means he laughs. So Isaac, this miracle child, has now been told, Abraham has now been told to take Isaac up to this altar and sacrifice him. Now you understand the weight of the story. This is what it says in chapter 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah, and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Like, what? This miracle child who you promised me you want me to take and go sacrifice? That's what I would think, and I think that's what any sensible parent would think. But Abraham chooses to load up his stuff and go. He gathers the stuff needed for an altar, he gathers his son, and they go. And even Isaac is going over the list, and he's like, we have oil, we have wood, but we don't have a sacrifice. Maybe Dad's gone nuts and forgotten. I better tell him. And in verse 7, Isaac asks Abraham, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says that God will provide it. And so Abraham is just carrying this out to the letter, and he gets Isaac, he binds him, he puts him on the altar, grabs the knife for the sacrifice, and this is what it says in verse 10. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your one and only son." If we keep reading, we see that God had caught a ram in the thicket, and they ended up sacrificing that instead of Isaac. And it was a blessing to Abraham and Isaac rather than a sad story. But what a gnarly story. This story that this miracle from God was tested and almost killed to test Abraham's faith. So I want to talk about this for a second. I am just blown away by these kinds of stories in Scripture, and there are more of them. I have to say, if it was me and it was my son Luke, I don't know that I could do that. That would be heart-wrenching for me. But Abraham chooses to step out in faith because he trusts that God knows what's going to happen. He understands who God is and what God can do. And he's like, God will make it possible. I don't know how, but God will make it possible. So that's the challenge. The challenge is when there is a situation that seems absolutely impossible and you don't know what's going to happen. Trust that God has a greater plan, that He knows what's going to happen, even if you don't. And then when you're in those situations, you can rely on Him and know that you'll make it through. Have a great week, guys, and we'll see you next week.